Hi, everybody. This is Aaron Mesh with Willamette Week. Today I'm joined by Jeff Hawthorne, who's the Arts Program Manager for the City of Portland, works closely with the Regional Arts and Culture Council. And today we're going to talk about what is my favorite subject in the city right now, which is the fate of an art installation on the very top of Mount Tabor that is a bust of York, the only Black member of the Corps of Discovery. That's the Lewis and Clark expedition. About a year ago, there was a statue there honoring Harvey Scott, who was a former publisher of the Oregonian, really didn't like women's suffrage. Somebody knocked that statue down, which is a fairly common occurrence during a year of social justice and racial justice protests. And then in February, suddenly a new statue was there, and that statue honored somebody else. And I think since then, there's been this sort of ongoing conversation in the city about what to do about that. Uh, there's also been the occasional vandalism, both from the left and the right, assuming the people who are leaving the graffiti, in fact, are representing the political camps that they claim to in their graffiti, and who really knows, and perhaps who really cares. Uh,
Mhm.
Today, we're not really talking so much about destruction as construction. And there's been Jeff. There's been a lot of conversation in the past 3 or 4 days since word started to get out that this monument can't be permanent. Um, but let's go back in time for a minute. So in February, the bust of York appears on Mount Tabor. What kind of conversation does that start within City Hall?
Well, first and foremost, we were as awed as everybody else about the quality of the sculpture and the manner in which it appeared just suddenly overnight. We were completely surprised by it and excited about the conversation that it started about, who is represented in the city's public art collection and who hasn't been represented in the past. But just speaking about the mechanics of that temporary installation, Portland Parks and Recreation has a policy about what to do when memorials and tributes suddenly appear in their parks, as this one did. We understand that there are many ways that communities commemorate individuals and support local causes through these kinds of tributes. And so the policy is to allow these temporary memorials to stay in place as long as they don't pose a danger to the public. So that was the city's initial reaction, and that's the position that remains today. The piece can stay as long as it doesn't present a danger. But now the trickier issue with York, and why we have said that it's going to have to come down at some point, is because although it looks like a bronze sculpture, it's actually constructed out of wood and urethane, or a type of resin. And so it wasn't really designed to withstand the elements. So we don't really know how long it will be before the installation starts to deteriorate because of the weather, but RAC and the park staff have inspected the installment and it's holding up well. So York can remain for the time being.
How long does urethane typically last in the elements? Any idea?
I don't know, and I don't know that anyone has been able to assess that, perhaps because there aren't very many public artworks made of that material.
That's fair. Um, so there have been a lot of headlines in the last week, and I'm just going to say right out loud that I think several of those headlines are quite misleading, that say York is coming down, and then deep in the story it says, but not anytime soon, and it actually has nothing to do with the vandalism. There's a clear implication that readers are supposed to take from these headlines that York is coming down because the city got freaked out by some vandalism and would like to have this controversy off its hands. Is that an accurate representation?
Yeah, unfortunately, the way that some of the headlines have been written, that has generated a lot of calls and emails to me and other people at the city who were left with the impression that that the removal of the sculpture was imminent. People thinking it's coming down this week or next, when in fact we've said all along that it can remain, but it will have to be replaced at some time because of its temporary nature.
So that could be years from now,
Could be years.
depending on how urethane handles the weather.
Right.
Got
Right.
it.
Or, I mean, the weather is one thing that could cause the sculpture to deteriorate and be removed. But at the same time, we are also having conversations with community about the permanent solution, not only at that site, but for some of the other monuments that were toppled last year. And so even another way that York could be removed is if we had come to an agreement based on community input about a permanent replacement for that sculpture.
Can you tell me a few of the options that are being discussed for what that permanent replacement would look like?
Nothing specific has been discussed other than the fact that some people in the community have suggested that the temporary sculpture could be recast as a bronze sculpture. And so that's one idea that has been put on the table. And the Regional Arts and Culture Council has been exploring that option with the artist who wishes to remain anonymous, but is in communication with RAC and with Commissioner Rubio's office. And so that's one possibility, but we definitely want to have more extensive conversations with the community and explore all of our options and the community's interests before we make a decision like that.
So there's a tidbit there that I find fascinating. The city knows who this artist is. Can you tell me anything about the artist? I realize you can't name them. You've agreed to a deal of anonymity. What can you tell me about this artist?
I honestly do not know the identity of the artist. I think some folks at the Regional Arts and Culture Council had a good guess and were able to confirm the identity of the artist. And they are communicating with the artist, but I don't know anything more than that, honestly.
Do you know if the artist is a Portlander?
I suspect they are, but I don't know that for sure.
Last question. How is the elk? Has it found a nice home upstate? How's it doing?
I'm happy to report that the elk is in excellent condition and safely in storage. The bronze was damaged during the protests, and that has been repaired. The elk was also part of a fountain that was also destroyed during the protests. And that part is it presents the more difficult challenge. So there is consensus on city council and I think in the community to return the elk to its position in the middle of Southwest Main Street. But because that fountain was destroyed, we have to figure out what we're going to build in place. And you know what, probably not a fountain again, because it's in the middle of the street and we no longer need horses that need to quench their thirst at the fountain as it was originally designed. So we're talking about building a new pedestal that honors kind of the style and the magnitude of the base as it originally was. And then that's going to require some historical reviews. There'll be community input opportunity before the city council can approve the final design for a new pedestal where the elk will be returned.